this episode of Game Design with Richard Pullman, we talked to a guy who calls himself Artificer about a game he made called Misfortune. It's going to be a great one. It's going to be about 2 hours of discussion. Really try to get into his system and understand why he made it the way he did and how it works, because it's really quite an unusual system. It's an RPG, and I'll leave the details for the discussion, but I was really happy to have this interview. I met Artificer on GDG. This is the official GDG podcast until the boss tells me otherwise. And I'm super happy to talk to my best friends in the world over there on GDG, have them on the show, let them promote their stuff, talk to them about issues, game design stuff, just really get into it, because there's an infinite amount of things I want to talk about related to game design, and I don't see any better time in history to talk about game design than right now, because everything sucks, and we need to make some good games. Hollywood sucks, video games suck, board games and tabletop games are actually pretty good compared to what else we have on offer. Social media is dying, the giants are falling, and there needs to be a new generation of people that just stick together and put out some amazing stuff, and we can create that sort of furnace of creativity again and really talk to each other, create a language that works to discuss things. And that's sort of the ambition. You got to have this big dream about it. There's this view of tabletop role-playing games as being this sort of sewer of losers who never adapted to the modern thing. And so you've got like 4chan, then you've got the board of traditional gaming, and then on that board you've got an even smaller subsection of guys who want to develop their own games. And so it's like you're 3 levels deep, you see, into loser territory. And that's one perception of it, but I totally reject that. That's completely wrong. It's the opposite. That's where the kings reside. That's where the masters of the universe are. And we're going to design the best games you've ever seen. It's going to come out of nowhere. But if you tune into this podcast and you listen to these guys, you're going to have the cutting-edge insight into the best creative community on the internet, in the world. It's going to be GDG on Discord if you can find it. If not, it's okay, because we don't need any more people. We got geniuses here. So only come in if you're a genius like everyone else, and we'll have you. And you know what? I just want to get into this interview. This is episode 1, but it went so well. I know it's going to go great with everyone else that comes on, and we're going to have people back multiple times to follow up on things. There's a million different ways that this podcast can go. There's endless subjects to discuss, and I'm looking forward to discussing them with you guys, hearing what you think, your comments. You can leave them if you're listening on SoundCloud, and they have that thing where you can leave comments right on the track. That's cool. However you want to leave them. And, I want to hear from you, and you're going to hear from me. So follow this and stay tuned, because we're going to have a lot more down the road. Okay, so this is episode 1 of the podcast, and I'm Richard Pullman. I'm here with Artificer. That's the name of your company and what you're going by yourself, right?
Yes. My company is called Artificer Games. It's a Finnish company because I'm a Finnish, but I can't have websites yet because of some bureaucracy. But I'll be making those too.
And your game is Misfortune.
Yes,
that's what I knew you as, Misfortunate on the on GDG for a long time, but you changed your name now because the game that you're making is so close to being released that you didn't want to have the confusion, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to have like the confusion of people. People usually just said that my name was Misfortune or the game was called Misfortunate. So
I
didn't like that. Yeah, like everyone made that mistake. Like everyone. So I want to distance myself from the name of the game, while it will be my flagship product probably, because it's a generic game. So
Right, so it's a generic tabletop role-playing game system, right?
yes.
And so you don't have a particularly big lore setup, and people are required to integrate into their games that they would run with your system?
Yeah. The idea behind the game is that you can basically run it without having any prep. It doesn't really require any prep beforehand. It can be, you can have prep. It can be good to have prep, but you don't need it. There's even rules for like coming up with the setting for the game, like, and the first scene of the game, like they're in the game.
So it can generate ideas and lore for the players.
Well, I don't have like tables you can roll stuff on, but it would work on a kind of voting system between the players and the GM, where someone gives an idea, and other people can veto that idea if they don't like it. But that person who vetoes needs to give the next suggestion.
Okay.
Basically.
Interesting. What made you want to design the game that way? Because most people that I've seen who do a tabletop role-playing game, they have tons of ideas of lore and story and a world they want to basically build as if they were the GM themselves, and they're so happy with their idea for a world that they're going to now turn it into a released game and present it that way, but you're going like the opposite way, it sounds like.
Kind of. It's an optional rule, but like I've put it in there in case people don't have an idea what to do. It's a how would I say? It's a mechanic, but you don't need to use it like itself. Like if you have all the stuff worked out, or if you have a setting that you want to run the game in already figured out, like if you want to take it from some TV series or anime or something, so you can do it like that. But
right, so like I have a world that I want to play in, and like the one that I want to use for my own game that I'm designing, there shouldn't be you have mechanical solutions to integrate different settings into your system.
Yes and no, because I actually try the idea of the system, like in on itself, is based on trying to simulate the narrative that is like the written ink on the paper.
Oh, right, yes. Okay, I remember you talking about this.
Yeah.
It's like a narrative simulation, so you're basically recreating sort of story beats and the rhythm of a story regardless of what the setting is, and then the players bring the story themselves, right? Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah. Like, you get the idea. Like, the idea is that the game runs on the notion that every role is, you don't look at the world, you don't look at how difficult this thing is, but it's more about going on about narrative stakes, for example. And
could you give an example?
Game is well,
like a traditional role-playing game situation is like you're in a dungeon and there's a gap you have to cross in the floor, and in most games it would be, well, what is your character's jumping distance and what kind of tools do you have, and then you have a difficulty rating and then you resolve it mechanically that way. But it sounds like you would have a very different approach to that.
Yeah, previously I had a more traditional difficulty, but then I realized that the game's rules don't really support it. It's hard to tell the difficulty if the characters' power levels, in a sense, can be so wildly varying, because you can have an immortal god as a character,
right?
But it doesn't imbalance the game because the game works how it works. So instead, in that kind of situation, like if you need to cross the gap, it's very easy to cross the gap if there's no stakes in it.
Oh, okay.
Like imagine that if you're just interested what's in there, then it's quite the easy roll because there's not a lot of stakes. Of course, if there's like lava down below or something very dangerous, then the gap there might be the stake is in the fact that you can't fail it because you'll get injured. But
and then that would make me wonder who is determining what the stakes are. Is it the consensus of the party? Is it just things that are previously established by the players, or is it there's a GM character or a GM person who would sort of know what the stakes are and be able to dictate that?
The GM makes the call, but usually it should be kind of obvious. Like the stakes go higher, like because the idea of the game is that roles become harder when they are more important to the characters. That's because you can re-roll infinitely in the game. So that's another topic when we go to the dice of the game. But
interesting.
Yeah. So the idea is that think about if there's the gap, and it's dangerous to fall down, but you're also chasing someone.
Right.
Suddenly, it's a much harder. It's a much harder roll because there are stakes in addition to possibly getting injured, it's losing the person who you're.
So if this
chasing.
is like, let's say this is the climax of a 10 sessions, and this is the key moment where you have to make this jump, and you're chasing this guy. If you fail in that moment, because it's the stakes are so high, is there a severe punishment, or how does re-rolling work in that case? You can explain the dice mechanic, because now I'm very intrigued. What happens if you win or fail in that situation?
Yeah. All right. The idea is that you can re-roll infinitely in the game. Basically, there are rules when you don't, but it ties to the game's name, Misfortune, because fate points in most games.
Right.
Misfortune is basically inverse fate points, where instead of having a certain number of fate points that you can use to reroll, which is the usual kind, you can instead take misfortune, which you can imagine like, you get lucky. So it's kind of like karma. So, you get lucky, and you can reroll, but your misfortune goes up because there will be some kind of punishment later.
Okay, so it's sort of tracking the number of times you cheat.
Yes. And you can cheat infinitely. Like, even in a single roll, you can re-roll a single roll 5 times if you really want to. But the thing is, when you hit roll double ones, you roll 2d6 or 3d6 but 2d6 is the base roll. When you roll 2d6 and you roll snake eyes, basically, you are punished by the amount that you have cheated, basically.
Okay.
So basically, you have you cheated 5 times and then you roll 2 ones. Then something bad happens to your character, which can be avoided with more bullshitting. Like, you can have plot armor.
Okay.
If you, because I wouldn't say call misfortune so much of a meta currency in the game. It's more like a damage track.
Right, I can see how it would work as being the factor that you would want to obviously keep at a minimum, but you
Yeah.
have to use it sometimes.
To succeed. That's the point. Like, the game's main philosophy is that you gotta be on your toes, and because I've changed the game, so this time, every time you roll, you start with a roll of 2d6. So it's always 1 in 36 that you fuck yourself up.
Right.
Basically, and more misfortune you have, like, there are tiers of misfortune, basically. Like, at 0, nothing happens, of course, because you haven't cheated, basically.
Right.
And from 1 to 3, you get some situational disadvantage, like, in that case, I'd imagine, like, if you're trying to jump the gap, the roll becomes infinitely more harder because the side of the cliff that you're jumping from starts collapsing, for example.
Right.
Something bad happens. And then if you get even more than that, from 4 to 6, misfortune, you basically, if you don't do anything, like you don't use plot armor or another character doesn't inspire you, basically, you get thrown out of the scene, basically, which means that you're out of commission for a while for some reason.
Interesting. So the punishment almost becomes just being passive and following along with what everybody else is doing for a while? Losing some agency, or is it not that severe?
Well, the idea is that, like, your character, like, here's the thing, like, the player defines what the punishment that they get is, basically.
Right, okay.
But it has to be of a certain severity, in a way. And, but when you go even higher from that, from 7 and up until infinity, if you don't do anything about it, your character is written out of the story.
How do you do something about it? Like, I'm imagining I would have a couple of misfortune points because I've cheated a couple times. Now I get to this point where I'm trying to make this jump across this gap. The GM decides that because the stakes are very high, he's going to start applying the punishment of the misfortune to this situation, or does it automatically happen, or who decides?
It happens only when you roll double ones.
Oh, that's
nowhere
only
else.
Okay.
So it just keeps on, like, stacking like that. And every time you get punished by the misfortune, it is lowered by 1 entire severity. So, like, if you had 5, it turns into 3. Or if it's at 3, it goes to 0, basically.
Interesting.
So, well, if you think about its name as misfortune, it means that you kind of, instead of spending your luck, you spend your bad luck, basically.
So, when you decided to make this game, did you start with that in mind already, that you wanted to not try to simulate the world and events, but emphasize the stakes that the players decide, what matters to them, and then build a system around that?
No. I can actually show you one of the older documents of the game.
Sure. I'm very interested how this evolved.
It has evolved a lot. Like, I can show you literally the first version of the game is extremely old. Where is it? I made it as a one-sheeter, basically, but it was way too long for that. Well, maybe not way too long, but it was.
So it started as the idea of a very simple system, but it wasn't designed around forgetting the simulation of the world. it was still going to be. Well, I'll let you show it if you want to send me the file or something like that.
Yeah, if I like, I have like 30 of these fucking things. So, where's that?
Well, while you're looking for that, that does make me curious about your workflow, because we wanted to talk about that. I wanted to ask you about that. I'm a big fan of working on paper and pen as much as possible, and I'll fill up notebooks of that. And then I only try to use a computer and cloud storage and stuff like that when either I'm worried about losing something important, or I want to be able to look at it across devices and stuff. It's kind of a necessity to use the computer, obviously, but I try to do all my planning and brainstorming and figuring out solutions on pen and paper, so I don't have that much of a archive of the versions throughout time. It looks like you kind of started with making clear versions one after another with different documents.
Well, it's more of like it just bloat, basically, because the game has changed so much, and every time it's changed, like, I like to, like, instead of being like something like a planned design history, it's more of like all the files that I've made on the way, and every time I made changes, I wasn't sure whether the change was good, so I saved it as a copy, because the game has changed immensely. You can just check that out. It's nothing like the current game. Okay. Nothing.
Yeah, this is just 2 pages.
Yeah, it's 2 pages. You only need to read the first page, really. The second page is just, that was actually about integrating the game into your setting, but.
Right, okay.
Because it doesn't do that anymore, so it's kind of different, because the whole game began from the idea that I wanted to have a similar clarity to D100 games, where you have a number that you have to roll under. You know?
Yeah.
That's very clear. Like, you roll and you instantly know whether you succeeded or failed.
Right. Yeah, this is very simple.
It's very simple. And but at the same time, I dislike roll under systems. So I was like, how can I make this game into a roll over system? Which gave the idea of weaknesses, basically, which was the first element of the game that I thought of, which is basically your normal stats but reversed. It's not in the game anymore, like, at least in the sense that they were like back in October 2016, but they just got
So 2016 is when you started?
Yeah. October 2016. Yeah. So I've been doing this for one and a half year now.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And you're now at a point where you're pretty sure this is the final version, or how far would you say you still have to work on it?
It's the final version. Like, final version. Like, at this point, I don't even care. Like, if I find out that the game just isn't fun, I'll just fix it in the second edition. I don't care, or something.
Right, because you know that this works, right? Like, I'm assuming you've tested it somewhat?
I've tested different versions of the game, and people have liked it. So, like, the previous versions were a little different from what is currently there, but the mechanics itself have basically only morphed a little.
It has to feel good
like,
to get to a point where you're confident enough in it that you can actually put it out and say it's the final version. And I think that's a smart idea to say, you know, because I mean, really, what harm is there in releasing this as the final version if you're confident that it's good enough for a first version, and then iterate on it and make updates and changes once people try it more. I mean, you really just need a good enough start. I know some people some people have a very different attitude about that, and they'll say, you know, you need to put out something as good as possible at the start, because people will judge it very quickly, and then it can get a reputation for being bad, and then no one will ever try a new version of it. But I don't really see it that way. I think, you know, you got to put out something that's good enough, and if the people who do enjoy it, especially if they enjoy the core concept of it, and you have a very unique concept for what you're doing here, or at least unique enough, that if they like that concept, they're going to want to help you to make it better if they like the idea at all. So I think it's probably safe to release this, see how people react to it, and then make a new version if you feel like it's necessary.
Yeah, the reason why I have so many versions of the game, like, this isn't the first time that I've said that this game is already ready, because the first time that happened was about a year ago. I was quite sure that the game was ready, but then I just ran into some production issues, and instead of just trying to, like, stall the game, like, not do anything with it, like, put it in the drawer and wait until the production issues basically go away.
Right.
I decided to, like, try to make it better, and I've been making it better a lot. Like, for a game that's in its current form, like 4,000 words, I put hundreds of hours into it. It's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, my game, I've quote-unquote been working on it for around 10 years, but there was years there where I felt so stuck in what I was doing, and I didn't know how to break out of it, that really some of those years were completely dead. I mean, nothing really happened on it. And there were a couple times when I also thought I was close to finished, and then, you know, this is the first time I've really put my mind into developing my game all the way to the end, and so you do have to hit many points where you realize it's not done yet, and that's the whole learning experience. And I don't pretend like I'm done learning how to design games or RPGs at all. I don't know how you feel, if you've done something similar to this in the past. Have you made any RPG systems like this before?
Yeah. Misfortune isn't the first game I've made, but it's like, perhaps like fourth that I've, like, almost finished. And the word almost finished is a thing that haunts me, really. I had one system twice as long as Misfortune, and then I decided that if it just wasn't good, I just didn't feel it.
Right.
Another, I just didn't feel it, and then, or more like, I've abandoned the games because I've lost interest in them. But with Misfortune, I realized that, well, this is something different enough that, like, even if I lost interest to it, at points I did, I was really fucking tired with the game, like, well, not about a year ago, but like, half a year ago, I was pretty done with the game in a way that I just didn't want to see it. But then I had a breakthrough, and now I enjoy the game, like, because when I have these breakthroughs, I usually get some realization of how to make the game better, and it actually. How do I say it?
What would the breakthrough be in this case? Because I'm curious, because that sounds like something that, I think a lot of people probably experience when they're designing a game, especially for a longer period of time, and you start doubting it a lot, and then you know that there is a problem, but you don't know how to get out of it, and then there's like that breakthrough moment.
Yeah. That breakthrough moment was traits. If you look at the older version, there's weaknesses, problems, saving graces, and actually, I think they were called key items.
I know there's missing items.
Missing items. Oh, it was so old. It was missing items. Jesus, that's old. Oh my god, I didn't even remember that. And secrets. All right. Basically, the idea is that in time, I combined missing items and problems. That became one thing. Then I just made secrets I basically turned secrets into another mechanic. It's kind of weird that if you actually look at this first draft of the game, basically, you actually can see all the things that led up to the current version of the game. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, I don't know how your current system works in detail. We haven't really talked about the mechanics. Like, we haven't talked about weaknesses, missing items, and secrets and all these things. But my general understanding of it, if I'm correct, is that when you're building a character, most games you try to build the best character you possibly can and give them the best items and max them out.
Yeah.
And then in this one, it looks like you're kind of creating a bunch of problems for yourself.
Yeah. Because, the idea, the first idea of the game was to make failing fun. Because, those hijinks that happen to people when they play, they're actually kind of fun. So, it was supposed to be, kind of around that. But the game has changed, and, it's still about that. I really want that to happen, especially with the current rolling mechanic. I really like the idea that when you roll, to fail a roll, it means that you give up.
It means that your character has given up?
Well, not technically. It just means that you have to, as a player, give up. You have because you can re-roll infinitely, but you just have to go and
you're saying that you don't really fail until you give up.
Basically,
until then, until you decide as a player, I'm done.
To not re-roll, you can always re-roll, which gives the game a kind of unique tinge in a way, because in a normal game you roll and you maybe think do I have enough fate points to re-roll or do I want to save them?
Right.
But here the idea is that
you kind of save them and hoard them and hope that you never have to use them, and then maybe you spend them all on something that you feel like you have to use them, but now you don't have any. And here it's just you decide how much misfortune you want to get, and that will kind of represent in a very clear way how important something was to you or your character, because obviously they wouldn't keep trying if it wasn't important to them.
Yes, that is basically the crux of the game. Basically, it's after I finished the first drafts and after I implemented the despair mechanic.
Can you explain that?
The despair mechanic was the original version of Misfortune. It was a much more direct way of handling it. it was different in the way that, wait, don't I have it here? I can't find it. Anyway, the despair basically worked like misfortune, so you could, like, succeed when you shouldn't, but it was supposed to have, like, directly consequences, like you would use desperation to succeed, but it would have some bad effect later on, regardless of, like, you didn't need to roll snake eyes for it to happen. It was just the thing that would happen.
Okay, yeah.
But then I just wanted to iterate it and kind of make it more suspenseful, basically.
So despair was an old concept, and that changed into misfortune. And now, when you have misfortune, yes. What again are the consequences for having more misfortune? Because I think I got confused before with the snake eyes being this sort of critical fail, but
yes.
Otherwise, does misfortune play a role in sort of normal activities even if you don't roll snake eyes? No,
it doesn't. Like, the only thing it does is it just puts the players on edge.
Right, because you know that at any point your critical fail, if I call it that, will suddenly bring back all of this karma, as you said. Now that makes a lot more sense. Now I understand it better. Yeah. And I looked in this first version that you showed me here. You had heart damage and strain damage. Is that still a thing?
No. It's not a thing anymore. Everything has been replaced with misfortune, and, like, the thing is, if your character gets injured, for example, that's the player's choice. You can fall off a cliff and not get injured. Why? It just happens sometimes. But you are rewarded if you are injured, basically. So
would a character, like if a character literally dies, or is in a situation where it only makes sense that character would die, in a sense, you have no choice but to cheat until your character survives and then accept that amount of misfortune. Is that not logical?
Well, how would I say it? Like, I wouldn't say that the game would actually necessitate that. Like, you can always pull some bullshit. Like, even if a dude falls into lava and you're like, yeah, he's dead. Like, in some stories, that guy will come back with some bullshit. So that's the point. Like,
okay.
Because I'm, like, trying to simulate narratives.
Is that what you said before, that your character just sort of leaves the narrative?
Yep, it leaves the narrative.
Because if your character, instead of dying per se, and it's official that the character's dead, you just seemingly die, then the story can still move on, and eventually this character is reintroduced as a living skeleton or something.
Yeah, it's possible, but usually I actually have rules for it in the game, like well, not rules, more like guidelines, where the GM can have a campaign where you are supposed to, like, or a story or a game session. Well, not one session is not enough, but like an entire story where a singular character is brought back, because you know, a character can be written out in myriads of ways, like, at least from the player character story. Like, one of my favorite ones, like, for that is that you can have a character that is secretly a traitor.
Right.
So basically, you can have that when all the misfortune stacks up, you betray the party.
Oh,
basically,
okay.
And then if the players want to have the character back, they need to somehow, you know, get them back onto their side, basically.
They have to roleplay the logic of this twist that was introduced and try to come up with bullshit their way into a logical explanation of how the character would come back in a way, right?
Well,
or would it just be sort of automatic, and that's the reason why he's back?
Well, the idea is that bringing characters back is difficult.
It's how much of it? Because I'm trying to imagine here. My character dies. Yep. Let's say that there's just guys with guns, and we're doing something dangerous, and I got shot, and my character can't escape it, and I decide I'm not going to cheat anymore. I'm going to let this character die, essentially.
Yeah, basically, the character is left bleeding out into the forest while the others run away, basically.
Okay, so then it's sort of a loose end, is what I would call that in a plot. Well, it's like it's apparent that he probably died, but it's not really official because you didn't see it.
Well, you can do it in several ways. Like, if you want to make it so that the character dies, the character can die. Like I'm not trying to dissuade that. As a player, the player chooses how the character goes out. The players choose a lot of things in the game. Like, if your character is thrown out of the scene, basically, and something doesn't bring them back, the player chooses how it happens, basically. Usually, of course, GM would dissuade the stuff that would be directly advantageous to the players, other players, like I don't know, bursting through a wall, and opening a hole into a place where something good. No, not stuff like that. But the idea is that the players kind of beforehand plan what kind of stuff could happen to their character.
Right.
So if your character is a traitor, you would kind of discuss with your GM about it. Well, you don't even need to discuss with your GM about it. You can just put to your character sheet that you're a fucking traitor, and when the thing happens, you just stab your friends in the back, and the GM will try to do something about it.
And so, but there would be sort of a forewarning there that, for the sake of the GM, they can at least anticipate this happening at some point.
Yeah. Of course, the GM should be kind of on top of some things, but as the game's nature dictates, the characters can reveal aspects of themselves. That's another mechanic.
I'm noticing in this early document that you shared with me that secrets is one of the sections.
Yes, secrets is one of the sections. But it could basically secrets got turned into the entire character creation, if that makes sense. Because, the metaphor that I use always when I talk about the game and the characters in it is a book. When you open the first page of the book, you open it. You read the first words, you maybe hear a name or two, but you don't know shit about these characters.
Right, you're making a lot of assumptions.
Well, of course, it's a new book. It's a new book from a new series that you don't.
Right, you're trying to discover what these characters actually are as you read. And so what you want at the start of a story is curiosity and to get interested in them, but not to know everything.
Yeah.
So your game is sort of designed around the idea of creating a bunch of mysteries and potential that can reveal itself through the game mechanics.
Yeah. The players are rewarded if they play off their characters' mysteries well, basically. I call it foreshadowing, basically. So
okay, yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah, so basically, the characters have traits, and if you foreshadow them, you are rewarded with additional trait points which you can use to get traits. Traits are all the good and bad things, and you can have good or bad things. And if you foreshadowing, one of my favorite examples in the one which I put into the game a lot is werewolf. If your character is a werewolf, you can play it up before you turn into a werewolf. So
right.
So
you have some sort of weird reference. Your character starts talking about something that, would the other players literally wouldn't know what's on your character sheet and wouldn't know these secrets, or is it kind of a big joke amongst the party that, yeah, we all know he's a werewolf, and we're all waiting for the moment where it comes out?
Well, it can go either way, but usually the more impact the twist has, you're rewarded only if your foreshadowing is well executed. Basically, the players vote when a character reveals a trait. The players and the GM kind of vote that where it was whether the thing was well foreshadowed, and
Wow.
they will get bonuses if the thing was.
This is very different from a normal RPG. I can really see how this justifies a different system. That's very intriguing. It seems like it's a lot more. It would be best played with a group of friends who
Definitely
don't want to exploit anything. Your motivation for playing it would be very different from the power gamer mentality, which kind of leads me into the question of what you think about the whole GNS concept and different philosophies of game design, because you're simulating, I guess, narrative
kind of
tropes and tendencies, but I wouldn't consider that to be simulation as other people use the word.
Well, yeah, whether it's a simulationist game or a narrativist game in a sense. The thing is, most narrativist games, like the definition in traditional DNS, is that the narrativist games have a tendency for the GM to have a story, whereas I'm trying to make the game focus on the characters.
Right, because
100%.
When you make your characters, you're literally building up, mysteries and then foreshadowing. So, you can't really build a story. You can't have the GM dictate the story that much if all of the stats and character properties are in the hands of the players and they've decided these things.
Yeah, how do I say? The entirety of the game is supposed to be it's based solely on the interplay of the GM and the players. It's supposed to be kind of like the players trying to surprise the GM and other players, and the GM trying to surprise the players, basically. That's the kind of thing that I want in the game.
Right, because there's not I guess the normal, traditional RPG would be that everybody puts their minds together to imagine a fictional world that is independent of any particular individual, and everybody contributes to their idea of what happens in these situations, and then you sort of have the GM negotiate and referee the results.
Mm.
But this is a lot more personal and social about, not that there's the objective world that is independent, but the narrative being pushed by players.
Basically, yeah.
But
that's why.
You don't think, how much do you think personally, how interested are you even in the idea of the GNS thing? Because I know at this point, I think a lot of people see it as being outdated or quaint, and I personally, I find it very interesting, and I'm glad that I read it, but I'm not going to try to consciously, design according to it as if it's the authority on the subject.
Yeah, it's more of a. I would think of it more of as a discussion piece, maybe. Like you can talk about the mechanics and how it can work as a framework for a discussion. Like if you're talking about certain types of players and stuff.
Yeah, I would think that's probably a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, but but the thing is that each table works differently, so you can't really you can talk about individual players and maybe even tables, but trying to quantify the whole thing into into a game, it's quite rare that the game actually you can actually take the game's rules and define whether it's one or the other. That's because in the end the game itself happens between the players and the GM.
Yeah, and a lot of the game theorizing and game design theories, they ultimately just rest on assumptions about player types, and as soon as that doesn't hold true in a group, it's sort of like a mistake to design a game around this one set of assumptions about what players are motivated by. And
yeah, definitely.
What's going to end up happening realistically is that, if 5 different groups play the same game in the same system, there'll be 5 different ways it's interpreted and applied, and certain pieces will be ignored and certain pieces will be emphasized, and they're going to find the pieces of it that they like. And I think that it's smart in a situation like yours to have something that's so fundamentally different and interesting that it's very clear that you wouldn't play your game to have that traditional experience.
Yeah, definitely not. I don't want to go on too much about how unique my game is, because in the end everything's been done, but I had a very clear vision of or more as the year and a half of my development time has gone on, my vision of what I want from the game has become really clear. I wanted to simulate ink on paper. It's what, and this is what I end up with. And actually that brings to another point, the idea of games developing themselves.
Oh, right, yes. You want to talk about emergent mechanics.
Well, they're a little different, but they do kind of connect, because the games developing themselves kind of means that when you work on a project, if you just let it sit on your mind, like Misfortune has sat a lot in my mind, you'll come up with novel ways to solve things in it. The game optimizes itself when you develop it, because you kind of subconsciously realize the better ways to do stuff.
Right, you're constantly questioning and trying to iterate, and I see what you mean there. And so you're kind of saying you believe that there should just be a natural sort of erosion of things that can't hold up under scrutiny, and probably emphasis on things that you realize you want to emphasize more in the game, and you don't want to have a rigid philosophy going into it. Like maybe there is somebody who says GNS says this is true, so I should design my game accordingly, or other game theories.
Yeah, well, how did I say it? Like, I'm inclined to, like, just focus on the things that I see are important in the game. Like, like if some people want to design their game around, like, things like control groups and stuff, yeah, not gonna really, well, I don't know. D&D 5th edition has been quite successful.
Well, yeah,
but,
I mean, I think either you can get a lot done and put out a successful product with all sorts of different philosophies, but, you know, I'm just trying to understand your own approach to it, because obviously you don't have a huge team and different groups of people that you're consulting as a professional. I mean, we're all just, everybody in this GDG community is trying to figure out their own way to push through the entire course of the development of a game, which is a very challenging task, I think. So you can't, you have to just find what works for your own development style, but obviously you want to listen to different philosophies. If it helps you, it helps you. If not. But you have you had a vision very early on, obviously.
Yeah, like you can see how the, like, I had a nugget of an idea with the first design document. Like, you can see it. Like, I had a nugget of an idea, but I didn't really know what the idea was, and I've just been kind of uncovering that idea this 1.5 year.
It's kind of maybe this sounds pretentious, I don't know, but it just does kind of remind me of the idea of the sculpture, where there's just a block of stone, but in your mind there's something underneath there, and as you're chiseling away at it, you sort of realize what you want from it and what's underneath there. It's like you're revealing it as you chisel away at things.
Yeah, that actually does very well segue to the idea of design by subtraction, basically.
Yeah.
Which just means that while you make the game, you just try to condense it. Like, always try to condense it. Like being very ruthless with it. Like, if you think that there's a mechanic that you don't think that fits the tone of the game, you just cut it. You don't even try to reiterate it some way, unless you can come up with a way to put it back better. Right. But if it, like, doesn't support the game's, like, vision, you just chisel it away, basically. And that's been pretty much how I've made Misfortune. Even, like, you can see that design document, that the first one, it's really short. It's 1 page long. But it's not actually that much shorter than my current version of the game. Like, my current version of the game is 4,000 words, and if I don't remember incorrectly, that version is somewhere around 1,000 words. And let's see. And it's weird that even as a about 1,000 words, that those 2 pages. Like, wait, no. It's more than that, actually. It's almost 2,000. Like, almost 2,000. So, the idea is that at its height of its, like, complexity, or length, more like, Misfortune was only 6,000 words long.
Oh yeah.
That's still quite short.
Yeah,
but
no kidding.
Even after that, I just kept cutting things away from it, because I just felt that I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that.
And so would you say that now when you put this out, let's say you get feedback and, you know, there's some sort of demand for more do you think you do expansions of different things or expand on different things? Is it that kind of game that you would expand on, like if people want special rules for things, or is it designed? It's because it seems to me like it's almost designed to be immune to those concerns of, how does a vehicle operate and these sort of like mechanics in that sense. It's more narrative mechanics, so it seems to me like it wouldn't need much expansion.
Yeah, like the game has evolved really. So, like it has evolved into a state where I think I can only make it better. I cannot make it bigger at this point anymore. Like I can maybe have some mechanics if I come up with some novel things to simulate some things like I don't actually have anything in mind what I could simulate with it. Of course, if I had ideas what I couldn't simulate with it, I would have made something about it. But like if a thing comes up that I'll just I can go up to and say, my game can't do that. At that point, like I can start thinking how it could. Like Misfortune has really weird, like the mechanics that are there. Like I've discovered things from the mechanics that I've written after the fact. Like, for example, like the comic relief character.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would a comic relief character work in Misfortune?
Huh.
Well, they wouldn't take. They would have probably lots of negative traits, maybe some good ones, and they would almost never use Misfortune.
Oh, right, because they accept a high amount of failure.
Yeah. And what is a prevalent theme of comic relief characters? They don't die.
Right. They fail a lot, but they don't die.
Yeah, or die, or like they can get injured maybe, but they don't like die. Or
yeah, they seem to always. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, like, and similarly, like if you have an action hero, the action hero is much more prone to die than the comic relief character, which is kind of an accomplishment in on itself, because you would think the character who fails a lot is more inclined to die, in a sense, in a game.
That's very interesting, because the hero in your system, if you're trying to play the archetype or a stereotype of the badass who doesn't fail at things, you're going to ultimately be getting Misfortune a lot. And because you're going to have to cheat to show those results that you didn't fail. But then when you hit the snake eyes or the critical fail, now all of those Misfortune points add up at once. And so that's the moment where your character has the major crisis and might die, right? Yeah, basically. So, like, the more characters use Misfortune, the bigger deal the crisis they meet are. Right. Like, and there's actually an interesting mechanic, like, if you think about anime tropes, like, have you watched Thing at the Paguran Lagan? Thing at the Black, what?
Thing and Paguran Lagan.
No, I have not.
Alright. Well, there's this character, who you think is the main character. The big brother, not really big brother, but like the figurative big brother, the real main character, who is like a real badass. And in a time of like need, that character inspires the main character into succeeding, basically, when they were just about to fail. that would be like, in my game, that would be when your character had like a massive amount of misfortune and got snake eyes.
Right.
But what happened is that character inspired, like, the Big Brother character, like, inspired the main character, basically. So, what then happened was, well, spoilers, from a more than 10-year-old anime series, that the Big Brother type character, Gamina, dies while, like, doing badass things. So, in a way, that's been, like, one of the things that I kept in mind, like, that scene in on itself.
Setting
Because,
up emotional stakes and impact
yeah,
through the mechanics, instead of having the logic of the situation itself be what dictates everything. There's a narrative foreshadowing, and then
and the thread. So, inspiring as a mechanic means that you take someone else's misfortune.
So you cut out there for a bit. You take somebody else's misfortune?
Yes.
Okay.
You, like, basically, it's the, you know, other character screams at another when they're failing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, trying to inspire them. But it's quite often that something bad happens to that character who inspires the other, like, later on.
Yeah.
Like,
that's interesting.
trying to,
I imagine that's the kinds of breakthroughs that you would have over time as you're designing this, is that the logic of your own system can recreate scenes and ideas in ways that, you know, most games hope to somehow recreate, and it ends up having a very forced feeling when, let's say, a dungeon master in playing Dungeons and Dragons or something, you know, wants to create and has in mind before the session even starts, they want to create this emotional moment, but the situation doesn't really make sense to justify that happening, and so you get this sort of weirdly scripted feeling in what is supposed to, quote unquote, be like a more of a simulation.
Yeah.
I've seen that, and it's always bothered me that it's like somebody decided this was where their character was going to be very heroic and this person was going to make a sacrifice, but that's not what the system is designed to create. It's designed to simulate, you know, probability and realism.
I get what you mean. Because that's the kind of thing that I went striving for. Like, I wanted to, like, be able to, like, have a system that, like, really could take the emotional moments of TV series, movies, and stuff, and, like, flesh them out into, like, real things that happen. Like, things that can happen in the game without, like, a hyperbole of telling it afterwards. Because, of course, if some emotional moment happens in D&D, when you tell about it to someone else, it sounds much more dramatic than maybe it was in the, like, when you were playing.
Yeah.
So,
well, that leads me to a different question I had about this. Is what was there something like you were playing a different game maybe, and you realized that it wasn't that there was, you needed to make your system because that system wasn't creating these moments effectively the way that you thought an RPG should? Was it born out of like a disappointment with different systems, or was it just you thought you could make this system work?
Well, the thing is, the weird thing is, like, there's nothing. I had no like a revelatory moment where I had to think about, like, I gotta make the system. No, it all started when I thought about the dice mechanic and wanted to make something that where high rolls are good, but the roll is obvious from the beginning. It started from that. Like, and now I'm here. I don't know what happened. So, like, I've started admiring my system because, like, at times, I've struggled to understand how my system's mechanics work. Like, it's like, that's why I told you about, like, the game developing itself. Because, like, at one point when I was working on the game, if I wasn't actively working on the game, I couldn't really explain the systems to you.
Yeah, okay, I can see that, because it's a very abstract sort of concept, and then the mechanics are also abstract and based on story logic. So if you're not a writer or somebody who deconstructs stories, it's actually hard to understand. I mean, I understand when you say foreshadowing and you know how you would set up a character at the start, at character creation, in order to create these little seeds that can grow as you play, and they get revealed at certain key moments, and how that would tie in. But I can see how that would be very difficult to explain.
Yeah, like one thing that was kind of prevalent in the previous versions of the game was that I had a disclaimer that if you're used to playing role-playing games, this game will confuse you. Because the game worked on like so much with the different logic than your usual games,
right,
that like in a way it was easier to to explain the game to someone who hasn't played a lot of RPGs than it is to someone who has. Like, I mean,
in a way, I wouldn't, not to take anything away from your game if I say this, it seems like I'm reducing it, but it seems almost like a social, what somebody would call a social game, not a role-playing game, in the sense that there's so many established traditional things that are in role-playing games, but there are like drinking games and card games and board games that have come out that are much more flexible and approach things from very different angles, and they're designed to get reactions out of people and have a group of friends, you know, challenge each other and improvise a lot more, but not take it as seriously about the simulated world. So in that sense, I think, and those games that are like social games, they're always much more popular and broad and accessible to people who don't have those things. And I can see this sort of fitting in between a traditional RPG and those sorts of games, where I'm sure you could play your system for a long time and develop plots and characters. But so, and then that doesn't happen in these social games. It's a pretty shallow thing. But this seems like it would have enough mechanical structure to handle a long story or an episodic sort of story, but still be accessible in once you do understand the logic of it, which uses a simpler logic, but a very different kind than most. I look forward. Do you think that when you release this, I'm guessing you're going to release it somewhere that people can pay for it?
Yep.
And
I'll
go ahead.
Just say. I'm gonna release it on Drive to RPG at least,
right,
and as pay what you want actually.
Oh, okay.
So people don't need to pay for it, really.
I wonder, I really am curious what the GDG community will think of it once it's released. I'm very curious about it. I love when I see people trying to make RPGs and systems that aren't just a clone of something else.
Yeah, I get what you mean. We will see. Maybe it will maybe it will become something of a discussion in later episodes. I don't know, maybe. But what was I going on about? Yeah, I'm really like planning on making something that, while not necessarily something to draw new people into the hobby, because it's such a different game that if you start playing Misfortune and then you try to jump into D&D, you're like, what the fuck is this? It's a wholly different, like, sort of game in a sense.
Yeah.
That, like, I'm trying to make it, like, in a way, into its own thing, but more like, I'm not actively trying to make it into its own thing. It just has become like that. So, I've just always thought about, like, what's good for the system and what will make the idea go forward in a way. Like, I always wanted to just push on forward and try to make the game into its own little thing.
I'm curious,
Like,
do you have, actually I have basically two questions. How much help do you think, would you say you've actually gotten from GDG, or I don't know if you were on the TG Discord channel as well. I think you were. And
yeah, I've been there.
And so, how much actual help do you think you've gotten from people there? Because even though I saw you talk about it on there, and I was curious, and I seem to remember, trying to contribute ideas, obviously I didn't really grasp it until now. Do you think people actually understand it well enough that you got some help there? Because people will try to help, but they need to understand the real concept.
Well, I'm a person who helps others a lot on GDG. Like, on the TG's Discord channel, I wasn't so active because the dev channel was a mess.
Yeah.
But like on actual GDG threads and on the Discord channel, I'm trying to help people out as much as I can. So, in turn, like, I've also learned how to ask for help in a way. So, I've always, when I've asked for like opinions on something, I've always tried to come to it from an angle that would make sense to a game designer, like not from like even though the mechanic, how would I say it? Like, even though the mechanic itself might not like represent like normal RPG playing, like but I would still try to like make the question into a form that if I get an answer, I can get something out of it.
Yeah, I've done that myself a lot, because I don't personally, my philosophy on game design has a lot to do with managing my own energy and my own negative tendencies in design, and I don't want to reveal a lot about my system early on and get feedback one way or the other on specific details, because I've realized in the past, I've tried to design, quite a few games in the past, and I'll go and immediately, as soon as I have ideas, I'll go and tell people about it, and a part of my brain just says, okay, you got feedback on that. That was a good idea. That was a bad idea. And I actually lose interest in fully developing them and putting them out properly, because I've already experienced the feedback, and in a way that's what my brain wants to do. And
all right.
So when I've been doing recently, and I've been doing with my current system, is exactly what you said, trying to ask questions but not directly with having to explain a lot of other things. Ask it in a general way, or in a way that touches on the principle of the subject, but doesn't require the full explanation for somebody to be on the same page as me.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
It's tricky.
I like GDG a lot, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast and talk to different people on there, because it's a very active Discord, and you get to know people and their philosophies. But I feel like everybody's game is going to be so different and requires so much knowledge to properly understand that even people who try to explain everything about their system, it's almost impossible to get strangers to understand what you're really talking about. So a lot of the discussion that happens is sort of indirect. It's sort of the common ground principles behind the design.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like the GDG channels do have a tendency to meander a lot, meander on an issue. Like you might think, of course, sometimes it's just someone ranting about things they don't like, but sometimes there might be actual information there like that people just want feedback on, but they don't want to talk too much about it.
It's almost like there's a language that we all have to try to learn and share with each other, where I've noticed people will just point at a different existing system and say, well, this is how this system handled that, and that's sort of the language that you have to use, because you can't explain your entire system every time you want to ask a question, and the other people are only going to understand things that are already established, other games and whatever. So there's you have to have a reference point and a starting point, and it's a very interesting discussion. That's why I like even just lurking and reading other people's discussions that they're having, because I feel like everybody's trying to learn the most effective way to get useful feedback and help each other in something as complicated and poorly explored as game design, because there's really a very almost, I don't know, it seems like a very simple, basic language that has been developed around it. It's like people still just talk about fun, and if something is fun, then it's fun, and it's like fun when you see it, and if somebody smiled, then it's a good game. It's like that's such a basic way of approaching something as complicated as game design.
Yeah. Game design is just, like as people have said, tabletop game design is 30 years. What is it? Dragging behind 30 years from video game design in a way. From an academic standpoint, we have almost no established stuff other than GNS, which has been universally either accepted or denied.
Right, and that's kind of the fact that GNS is still this starting point for debating and discussing game design really tells you how simple and unexplored the whole thing really is academically, because even looking at it originally, it didn't even present itself as being that much of a authority. But what else can you point to? There are other things. I know there's other people have done profiles of different player types, and there are panels and discussions that we share in GDG to try to inspire people and just get more articulated language for using to discuss game design. But that's something I'm always interested in. I think Discord and this GDG channel really has the potential to do a lot of good when all of us kind of are putting our minds together to try to help each other with our systems.
Yeah. I see what you mean. I don't think much of these really like even exist. Like, you know, groups of people who with a interest in like game design, who are all basically making their own systems. People at other stages of development. Like,
I tried to find them. I mean, I didn't end up at TG and GDG because it was, you know, the first thing I stumbled onto. I looked a lot all over the place, and it was like there was the Forge, I guess, and that was that's gone and buried now. And it's like I found like 2 other forums where people are kind of trying to do it, but there's really not a lot out there from what I can tell.
Yeah, at least for like quick feedback.
Right.
Like usually it's like better for like very lengthy stuff like RPG.net and well, there's of course Reddit, but you know. Yeah, but
and I think that's one of the things is that all of those different formats, message boards and forums and stuff, they promote a very long-winded explaining, and they sort of reward they don't reward quick feedback and strong opinions as much as how you can phrase things and present it in a way that sounds very formal and official, and it's much more pretentious. I mean, that's why 4chan and like /TG it's impossible to do any of that there. You can't afford to have long posts, and you have to make your point quickly, and that's obviously why people who use 4chan prefer it so much over Reddit and these other message board systems that, you know, people think they're celebrities because they write long posts and make blog posts on these forums every day, and they spend that's the other thing I found interesting about GDG is that because you're just talking to whoever's there at the moment, and they'll catch up and you catch up later on, and it's all moving so quickly, and same with TG, you can't sit there and linger and spend your whole free time making these long posts that are supposed to impress people. You got to make a point and move on. And in the end, you do more. I've focused more on actually designing my game rather than designing posts that are supposed to get people's attention, you know?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, and in the same vein, like the GDG Discord channel, like it works because the feedback you get is usually really direct because we have a lot of channels going on.
Yeah.
And like there are like different channels to talk on, so people don't usually start talking about different stuff in the same chat. So if you just raise a point, then someone will answer to it like usually pretty quickly and usually pretty shortly. So
yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with the way that it's been organized and the way that at first when it was new, because I was one of the first people who really was trying to make use of all the different channels, and you know, it's like the evolution of it has very quickly become almost every sub channel on there gets used constantly, and if you don't want to, you know, if you're not in the mood to discuss or try to help somebody on writing, but you are okay, you know, just talking about the math and the mechanics or the brainstorming or whatever, it does seem to be pretty well organized right now. I'm wondering if what you think about the idea of a round table discussion. If we want to do a podcast somewhere, if I want to do one in the future, where everybody piles in, or whoever's interested piles into the actual like voice channel.
Yeah, voice channel. Yeah, we can try that. Like, I would be kind of interested in that. Like, I know that my views would be probably, probably on the very far end of most other people there, but I don't really, like, that doesn't really bother me. Like,
well,
I'm making game. Yeah. Well, you're the guy who has never shown.
I'm the meme of the channel because I've never done anything. I've never showed anything. This podcast is going to be the first thing that I actually put out. So
So, well, at least now people will actually hear the reason why you haven't actually like published anything, like or posted anything. Like that's a good thing. Like at least we got an answer for that question.
You know what? I will say this. I promise I am working on a real game. And I do want to put it out soon. Yeah. Oh, my dice just went. Sorry. No, that's okay. Oh,
laughing
man.
Too much. But like, I believe you. Like I believe that you're actually working on stuff. No, I really do. And like, I'm interested to see what you come up with. So,
I've put out. I try to tell people I've put out parts of it, and I've helped other people with their ideas too. So you can see I'm not just hanging out there because I think it's cool. I don't know what the alternate idea is of why I'm there. Is being in GDG really such a cool place that somebody would go there and pretend like they're working on a game?
Yeah, that's where all the cool kids at.
I guess so. Like,
yeah, but I don't know. I think I'm more comfortable position in this chair. But yeah, what were we talking about? Well, GDG in general. So yeah, like if we get a roundtable discussion going on, like that'll be good.
Well, probably. I would think. What I'm thinking is maybe we'll pick a topic, and whoever's there can join it and know that they're being recorded, obviously, for a roundtable discussion. I don't know if you've seen Dungeons and Dragons has put out a couple of roundtable discussions with Mike Merles and Matt Colville and Matt Mercer and whatever. And so there's like 4 people at least in this panel, and it's on YouTube. And I found those very interesting. Like, even though I kind of hate Dungeons and Dragons, and even 5th edition, I have so many problems with it. My hating Dungeons and Dragons is what inspired me to make my system in the first place. But I'm listening to them.
Yep.
Yeah, basically. And so, as I'm listening to them, the topics they bring up are so interesting. I feel like you could take the same topics that they discuss and take it out of the D&D context and just make a game design discussion, and then have a roundtable discussion with GDG members, and it would be interesting to hear different people's opinions. I just think you would need to have a moderator and ability to mute people so that when one guy's talking, he's the only one you can hear, stuff like that. I don't really know how to do that on Discord, but that sounds interesting to me.
Yeah, actually, you could have you could just say people that have that push to talk on, so
right.
they need to.
Yeah, and then hopefully nobody's just there trolling to, ruin the whole thing.
And probably need to take Monchop with us, so
take
the boss, so he can mute people. Well, actually, you can mute people on your end, and if you mute them on your end, they won't get the recording. So it.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, I plan on talking to more people. I hope that. When would you say you're probably aiming to release this on Drive-Thru RPG?
Yeah. I have a pretty set date on it. Of course, I'm not gonna release the date until I'm sure that it will be on that day.
Right.
If I get if my possible editor contacts me, and I'll get things sorted out on their end, and then I'll get my artist to make maybe one more piece and maybe some other stuff. Then I would be planning to
in the next 2 or 3 months at least, right?
Yeah. Like if I get that done, like layouting the game wouldn't take that long because it's so short. So if I get those things done before, I'd say, end of this month, then I'll be releasing it on 14th of May. That's nice. That's like my date if I get there.
Right, it's your goal. You're hoping to reach it in that time, but
yeah,
obviously there's no set deadline when you're doing it yourself. So
yeah, I'm just trying to get it out as quickly as possible because it's been haunting me for 1.5 years. Please.
Yeah, I don't know. As somebody who's trying to made my shit work for 10 years or so, it's that doesn't sound like a long time at all. I kind of wish that mine was like that, but I've probably for 3 or so years I've been much more intensely trying to develop it, and I don't pretend to, have started with a good idea of how to even approach making game design, and GDG has actually really helped to focus things. So I would say that would be amazing if you could get it done soon, get it out, and I'm sure that GDG will check it out. You'll probably get quite a few people, giving some money for it, and hopefully it turns out to be
profitable.
Profitable and successful enough that you can continue to support it if it needs support, and you'll be there. You'll be one of the only guys in that channel who has really something to show and really has a final product there.
Yeah, like of the people currently in there, didn't someone just publish something quite recently? I think.
I thought maybe that Ackroyd Diesel got published.
Oh yeah, that Ackroyd Diesel. That got made recently.
Because they actually had a podcast on SoundCloud itself. I would recommend people go and listen to that.
Oh
podcast.
Yeah. And then there's Dark God, who is getting closer to completion, I guess.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, while we talk about design philosophy, I never actually got to talk about the emergent mechanics thing, actually, because they are a different thing. That's actually, like, if we can backpedal a little into the discussion on GNS and, like, game theories, kind of. That's actually my take, is emergent mechanics as being the centerpiece of every game, even if people don't want to admit it. So emergent mechanic means that, like, it's really simple. It's just when there's two or more mechanics that the interplay of which creates another mechanic. Mm. Like now that we've talked about it, Misfortune has a lot of emergent mechanics, like the whole thing about like with plot armor and Misfortune. So, like, in a way, if you don't have enough trait points, like your metacurrency that you use to buy cool stuff, if you don't have enough of it, or you are actually on minus, you want to get to a point where you can safely use it. And that would actually mean that you need to take negative things to your character if you want to not die. It creates like another set of mechanics or kind of like it's kind of like a table mechanic. What happens at the table instead of what is in the book. Like,
and you're talking about after character creation, you still have room to edit your character in a sense, and dictate what is happening and evolving. Right?
Oh yeah, that one. Forgot to talk about that one because Misfortune doesn't have character creation.
Oh,
that was the thing. Like, you start your game with your character sheet empty.
Oh,
because you don't know anything about your character. Why would there be anything there? You don't even know their name. Maybe you do. Do other people know? Does the GM know? No? Okay. Well, like, because the whole character progression thing in the game works on the side that you have, basically you have trait points, which is a number that can go in the negatives. Like, you can take, like, if you want to take a trait that your character, if you want to reveal a trait, either gain trait points from it if it's a negative thing, or you lose trait points if it's a positive thing.
Right, so when you say that, I naturally start thinking of like something like GURPS, which has advantages and disadvantages of the character,
kind of.
But that's entirely character creation, and like the entire system of GURPS is just creating the character, really. That's what all the mechanics are basically geared towards. And this is like, as you're playing, you're deciding how much you want to emphasize different parts of your character, and then you just have different incentives to even take negatives as you progress.
Yeah, basically. So that's why, like a week back, I was talking about the fact that I was thinking about putting some write-ups on different player types that can happen, like different player behaviors that can happen while they play the game, because the mechanics work the way they are. Like, some people might want to take traits to save their asses. Like, if they're getting beaten, they'll take a new trait. They take a new positive trait, so they can actually roll another die and actually negate that failure.
So what would be an example of a positive and a negative trait?
Oh, well, that's the thing. Like, I'll take the werewolf example again, because werewolf as a trait can be either positive or negative.
Right.
Depends entirely on the context.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the name of the trait isn't as important as which way it's inclined. So if it's a negative trait, like if you have a negative trait that is werewolf, it means that you turn into a werewolf, and basically it might mean that you go berserk, like you lose control. Whereas if it's a positive thing that you're a werewolf, it means that you can turn into a werewolf at will, basically. Like, you can, so it also, of course, it depends on the context of the game. But whoops, almost went finished there for a moment. It happens. But so if a player wants to add like a thing to their character, like they can decide whether it's good or bad. And actually, there's things called rising and falling traits. Oh, now I'm talking about different things. I'm not talking about emergent mechanics at all. Well, whatever.
Well, to me, this sounds like emergent mechanics, because it happens while you're playing, and it sounds like you're literally designing mechanics for your own character as you're playing.
Yes. Well, of course, you can have an idea of what kind of stuff you want to do, and then you foreshadow them. And if you foreshadow them, when you reveal them, you get bonuses.
But going back to the actual just idea of emergent mechanics, while you're designing the game, how do you consciously decide, or is it supposed to be accidental and you just sort of embrace the fact that it's accidental when you're designing a mechanic and you're like, well, this one does this and this one does that, and so as players are playing, they're going to have to struggle with, or appreciate that there's sort of a third mechanic that is built out of those two and how they collide.
Well, it's kind of a, how do I say it? I lost my train of thought.
Well, psychologically, if you're talking about it that way, something like, keeping your health points high is a typical goal of players, and yet, obviously taking risks and endangering yourself is necessary if you want to get experience points, whatever. And those are separate, health and the rewards for taking risks. Is that the psychology of the risk reward? Would that be an emergent mechanic, or are you talking about sort of recognizing officially in like rules a mechanic and designing a mechanic to be emerged, or just letting things happen?
It can be both ways. Like some mechanics in my game, like I would say that the fact that playing a comic relief character who doesn't die it's kind of an emergent mechanic that just happens in a way. But that wasn't really a deliberate thing. But what I think is that those emergent mechanics that come from like you designing the game, like whether they're deliberate or not, they are actually more important than the mechanics that create the emergent mechanics themselves. Because in a way, if you have the HP and gaining experience thing, you can basically create the same kind of mood that you need to risk yourself to gain rewards. You can create that with like lots of different ways. That's the thing that I'm trying to go at, is that you should be aware of what kind of emergent mechanics you are creating with the mechanics that you have, and how you could create those mechanics in another way.
Yeah, would it be fair to explain that in a different way by saying that what you're creating is not necessary? An emergent mechanic might have a more specific definition than what you're talking about. It would be more like an experience or a byproduct that comes out of these mechanics, because the experience of the risk reward can be had in many different ways. And if that's what you want as a designer, is to have the risk reward, what you're saying is design mechanics that create that experience, and don't be limited to just thinking about one mechanic at a time, and that sort of a strict mentality, but rather approach it from as many ways as possible and decide which one is best for creating that experience.
Yeah, and which way of approaching it fits best to the game that you're making. Like, some people are so super attached to their own mechanics. Like, it happens. Like, of course, you've been honing it for a long time, but sometimes you can recreate the important part of that mechanic, which is how it interacts with other mechanics. You can replicate that with another mechanic, which just fits better into your game. Sometimes it just happens.
I would say that kind of touches on the idea of like a holistic design to your game, where you try to take the wider view of what you're accomplishing with each mechanic together, rather than, well, this mechanic makes sense, and so I'm going to keep it, and this mechanic makes sense, so I'm going to keep it. But they each have their own separate logic. And then when you actually play the game, you realize that when you add them all up, some of them are fighting with the other ones and preventing that experience that you wanted to get out of it. So you almost want to have a goal, an experience goal, which is what you kind of said you did, where you wanted, to have players kind of fit this narrative feeling, and the dice system was clearly aimed at the beginning at creating one experience. Yeah,
but then I've iterated on it, and it has turned into something else.
Right. By design, by subtraction, in a way.
In a way, I've taken the mechanics, I've taken them in and out as I've seen how the whole thing comes together, and then, I can tell you, there was once basically almost like a complex combat mechanic in Misfortune, which is like, why the fuck would I even try to do that? Because my vision was not so clear back then.
Right.
What I'm trying to tell is like in the Game Maker's Toolkit video about design by subtraction, it's important to find the core of the game and try to strive for it. You don't even have to do it entirely in a holistic sense, maybe. You don't have to think about it holistically, but you just gotta think about whether a thing supports the thing you want. And then you just gotta, in a way, the holistic goal of the game, which, I like to design games, from the top to bottom. First define what you want from the game, and then you start thinking about what kind of stuff what kind of emotions I want to evoke from my players, and what kind of situations I want the players to encounter, how I want the GM to run the game.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty conscious of what the table experiences and the different roles of people at the table.
Yeah.
Which is different than, it is quite different from people who, they say this is the genre of story I want to focus on, and, they really don't consider that much the psychology and the roles of the people at the table, and how much they're starting to work with mechanics, and then they sort of wait and see what the experience is at the end, because they sort of designed it from the bottom up.
Basically. That's also one of the main reasons why, if you've been on GDG, you probably see, someone has asked, what kind of dice system should I use for my game? And I fucking wailed on them. Because I was like, that is not an important question yet. Because, to me, the dice system you use for the game should be a thing that you don't design too eagerly at the beginning. You should only start doing it once you realize what kind of a game you want to make. Of course, you can you can say that, yeah, I knew what kind of game I wanted to make from the beginning, but I mean, think about first, I had that one line of questions that I threw at some people, what kind of, do you want the game to have, ability scores? Do you want the game to have, what kind of, success probability do you want the players to have? Do you want people to affect that success probability? And those kind of questions are much more important in the beginning than what shape of dice you'd use.
Yeah, when I hear people ask questions like that, the first thing that comes to my mind is that they must be making such a predictable game that is so similar to others that they don't even realize that they should be asking the question of what the goal of their game is. Because why would you ask about such a specific thing in a vacuum if there was not a set of assumptions already in place? And I'm a very big believer in, defining first what you want to accomplish and then find a way to accomplish it. But when other people just come up with these, really, that is a perfect example, and it happens all the time. And if you go on TG, the actual board on the site, people will do the same thing. They'll just ask, what kind of dice should I use for my game? And it's sad. That's the starting point of their whole creative journey. Is I'm going to start with a dice mechanic, and I'm going to let, not only that, but I'm going to let somebody else decide for me. I'm going to go here and ask other people. Like, if you did want to make a really creative dice system, why would you start by just asking other people as if there's an objective, factual, best solution? Well,
people think that things are that easy, like the perfect pasta sauces thing,
what perfect pasta sauce?
Yes, perfect pasta sauces. There's no perfect pasta sauce. There's only perfect pasta sauces. Or there's no perfect Pepsi. There's only perfect Pepsis, which basically means that tastes differ, which is obvious. But even when studied meticulously, you're going to get different groups of people liking different things. So you can't really have simply the best dice mechanic, because that's not how it works.
Right. I mean, one of the ongoing memes, and I have mixed feelings about it, honestly, because I think people use it to get out of answering difficult questions a lot of time. But the idea of the wrong, bad, fun, and judging people's preferences and not accepting that there is a whole spectrum of different kinds of players and demographics that want different experiences, and therefore, nobody's ever in a position to judge what somebody else enjoys. And I feel like that is a very lazy get out of jail card if somebody criticizes you or criticizes an idea. And if you don't want to be criticized, you can always say that. But hopefully, somebody like myself, I judge myself and what I do harsher than other people judge it. And I'm always trying to anticipate criticisms, but I can see people using it both ways. One, to try to explain that the way that you think all the games should conform to is not correct, that there's a whole variety of fun out there. But the other way is, I don't want to have to justify things. I'm going to say that my game is fun, even if it's really not. And then you can't judge me because I said it was fun, and it's just an opinion.
Yeah. How do I say it? People forget, because game design does have objective qualities. You can have a well-designed and badly designed game, and I think that really just comes down to emergent mechanics. If you know what your game is trying to do, and if it does that well, then the game is succeeding at what it's trying to do.
And that would, I would say that it sounds like you would also agree with me that, commercial success and making money, while obviously being one of the goals, if you're going to make it for sale, that is not the best way of judging whether a game is good or bad.
Yeah, of course not. The plethora of people who hate Numenera, for example, it's a good example. It's a game that divides so much opinions. there was some of those people who put the 500,000 into his Kickstarter campaign, and then there are people who just see it as goofy and hate it. And you at that point you have to like kind of look beyond that. Like you have to look beyond the fact that it was commercially successful, and just kind of look at the mechanics and what it's trying to do, and whether it's good or bad at it.
And that brings me.
I haven't read it. But, yeah.
That brings me to a point that I wasn't planning on talking about, but it really bothers me, and now that I think about it, which is the introduction in the rules of so many RPGs. The introduction is where you should establish what your game is trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so game designers, you can tell, they write the introductions after their whole game is designed in a way that forgives the shortcomings of it, and they don't acknowledge the real goals of the game, but instead try to make an argument for why it is successful at what it's trying to do. And it's sort of this, I can feel it myself, like if in past versions of my game, if I had written an introduction and tried to pitch it to people, really what I would have been doing at that point, because I wasn't confident in the design, would have been basically making excuses. And then if somebody looks at it and they say, well, this is what the game was trying to accomplish, and yes, it did accomplish it. Well, that was me lying. I didn't really want to accomplish that. And likewise, the explanation in the introduction where, almost every RPG does this, where they just say the point of the game is to have fun. So basically, if you're not having fun, you're not playing the game right. So it's your fault.
Oh yeah, that's a bad one. Like, you shouldn't do that. Of course,
happens all the time.
Yeah, of course, having fun is it's an important thing, because it's a pastime. It's it's a hobby that you do for fun, but at the same time, it's not like a thing you can use to justify things.
But doesn't it go without saying? Isn't that kind of like saying that food is supposed to taste good, and it's like it shouldn't be said, because when you say that that's the goal, now it's built into the instructions of the game. Like, I kind of have this ridiculous metaphor that I try to use where, I'm going to design a game where you have 4 stones, and the rules of the game are to have fun. That's the rules. You have to have fun. And if you don't have fun, you're not playing the game correctly. But all that there is 4 stones, and it's up to you. Good luck, bye, that's the game. It's like, that is not a game, and the goal of the game is not clear. Fun is not a goal. Yeah. That you can pitch. Yeah, sure. I understand what you mean in that regard. Of course, it's good to mention it that while you're playing, you're supposed to have fun, because that's also a kind of a remedy that GMs can use if someone starts complaining about rules. Right. Because you're supposed to have fun. Because people will become obsessive, and to the point where they lose sight of the fact that obviously you're supposed to be having fun. And I think especially for, I don't know, maybe younger people, at least myself when I was younger, you become a little bit too wrapped up in the logic of rules and being technical and winning and stuff. And as I've gotten older, I've really, if I'm going to use my free time to play a game, I'm going to obviously do what it takes to try to make it fun. Yeah. Recently I found the fun in playing extremely flawed characters. It's much more fun playing someone who has obvious shortcomings, because it just lets you role play more. And that's what I derive most of my fun from
So, like, and incidentally, after I found out how much fun playing flawed characters is, I suddenly make the game about flawed characters. That's
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you did, create a goal for yourself and experience a kind of experience you wanted to create, and now, because you had that, really, in a sense, you are in the best position to judge your own game. But other people, if you're honest about it in your rules of what you're trying to experience and what you've explained here on this podcast, people will be able to judge your game much better because of that, and decide whether they want to play it, decide whether they want to buy it. And that I appreciate much more than this sort of generic idea of just fun and
trying to avoid the question.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty much. Do we have anything else on the menu right now? I don't think.
No.
Do we?
We talked about everything.
Yeah. That was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and probably in the next month or whenever, I would like to come back and do another discussion with you yet, see how you feel about your game after it's released. Do we have any interesting note to end on? I think that was quite the valid point to stop. So yeah,
sure.
Yeah, we can stop it here, and if anybody wants to continue discussing anything we talk about here, we can jump on GDG. Yeah. That's the whole point of that community, is that it's always ongoing. So
yeah, that's true. Thanks to anyone who's been listening.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this and being the first guest, and I hope that your game release goes well.
Yeah, hopefully it all goes well. So yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.